Hi, I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, and thank you for joining me on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. Are you codependent because you've fallen for a narcissist? This is one of the many questions we'll be dealing on this episode of the podcast. If you found this podcast to be helpful, it goes a long way if you leave us a review, but also be sure to subscribe. And are you aware that I have a toxic-free relationship club? If you're interested, check out my webpage at carriemcavoyphd.com on the mental health resource list page. Okay, let's jump into this taping of TikTok Live on narcissistic abuse. Let's jump into narcissistic abuse, guys. Let's talk about where you're at today. Let me introduce myself to those of you who don't know who I am. I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy. I am a psychologist. I have over 20 years of counseling experience. I closed my practice in 2015, when I was widowed. I was in a long-term marriage for 31 years, and then I made a disastrous mistake. Although I had a troubled childhood, grew up in an extremely neglectful home. Beautiful people. I mean, from the outside, our family was like a model family. Seriously, you would not know on the inside that it was a mess. It was a real mess. But their severe neglect was a hallmark of my childhood. And interestingly enough, as a psychologist, I didn't address it. I didn't want to be one of those broken, there's my pop is coming, thank you so much. I didn't want to be one of those broken, wounded therapists who then treat out of my brokenness. So I literally avoided the topic of trauma. And I was going through grad school just kind of it's when PTSD was first identified as a diagnosis. Yes, we'd known about it all the way back since the late 1800s with Charcot and hypnosis, and then Freud talked about it, and then there's various different theorists talked about it, and then we saw it with World War I with shell shock. Then it became very apparent again in Vietnam when people were coming home from Vietnam very troubled, that then they started to see it, but it didn't become a diagnosis until 1980. Now, my graduate training was from 1986 to 1990, just to give you a sense. So CPTSD wasn't labeled and technically until 1992 by Dr. Judith Lewis Herman was the first person to coin CPTSD. But PTSD wasn't coined or identified as a diagnosis until PTSD. So I was hearing all of this in graduate school, but I just didn't want to be one of those broken people trying to fix broken people. But aren't we all? Isn't that what we're all doing, Interestingly enough, when I got married again, I thought I met a fabulous person. He seemed like everything I wanted. I actually had a list of qualities of something I was looking for, and he matched all of them. But I married a narcissistic sociopath. You take the worst of my childhood, the worst people, the worst dynamics, and you ball them into one big, person, and you put it into that. That's who I married. I married my trauma. Isn't that awful? But this is what I think a lot of us do. Now, we don't do this on purpose, but this is what happens when you try to outrun problems. Why? Anybody who says, I don't believe in therapy, I don't think we need to go back to work, work on these issues. I think we just need to put it behind us. I'm sorry. I'm a living case. It doesn't work. You will not outrun it. You will end up doing something horrible, like marrying it like me. But you know what? It's changed me. I was talking to someone last night, met this woman through Instagram. She's going through a rough time. She just left her abuser in January. And one of the things she said to me as she was chatting with me was, and isn't it interesting, those of us who've had a lot of trauma, we have some insomnia. So here this conversation is happening, into, very late at night. But one of the things she said interesting is, I don't think I want to be normal again. I want to feel like I used to feel, like who I was before. Is that going to ever happen? Will I go back to who I was before? And then she answered her own question and said, I don't think I will. I think she's gone. I think I'm becoming someone new. So let's start there. Let's take that as a topic and talk about how is your journey, your recovery going? Are you becoming someone new? How does that feel? How does it feel to see the old you in the past? And how does it feel to let go of that? Are you doing that okay? So there's one thing we can talk about today. There's another thing we can talk about it's kind of like combines with that, and that is the person that you met, that you were sold, because that's what happens with narcissists and sociopaths, is they sell us something. Well, everybody actually does when we're dating, but they do it even more on a more extreme. They're really making sure they've camouflaged themselves to mirror what you want. Yes, we all do it to some extent. I don't want to say they're the only ones who are doing it, but they really do it. They do it for lots of reasons, not just because they're manipulative and exploitive, but they also have great fears and insecurities too. So we're sold a persona that isn't real. It's a facade. But here's the thing. That person that you met was pretty amazing, weren't they? And don't you feel, and I know we say go no contact, but the thing is that person, it actually feels like a real person, and we want that back, but we know who we ended up with wasn't that person. So we don't want that person back. The person we ended up with, we don't want them back, the Mr. Hyde. But we really wish we could come back to the Dr. Jekyll, don't we? That's how I feel. Sometimes I think about that and I think, he was a pretty cool guy. Does that person actually really exist in the world? Now, it doesn't exist in him, I know that. But wouldn't it be nice to meet that person? But then you hear, everyone of it, if you listen enough to Narc Talk, you hear, well, you've actually met a mirror of yourself. But is it wrong to want to meet someone who's a lot like us? I don't know. Here I am a psychologist. I'm not for sure that's a bad thing. We make it like, oh, that's how you got taken in is because of that. But I think it's more complex than that. I think all of us have a longing to be fully known and understand. And yes, we know and understand ourselves. But, I think that, there's a wish for that, a wish for us to have that and connect with that again. And of course, you guys know about my book. It just came out in February. It's Love You More. It's an inside look of what actually happened in a narcissistic abusive relationship. For those of you who are maybe on the fence, like, is there really something to this? Or am I alone? Or maybe it just happened to me. It doesn't happen to anybody else. If you'd like to know what actually happens, what it looks like and how it could happen even to a trained clinician, Love You More. It's called Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. You can get it, again, there's a link in my bio to where you can buy it from me directly for a discount, or you can also get it everywhere you buy books, like online. It's Kobo, Amazon, Apple, all of that. Yeah, Love You More. But I see there's some questions come in, so let's leap into the questions, guy. So the first question is, how do you find a good therapist? Any suggestions? And I'll tell you why this is a problem. This is a problem because clinicians are trained, we are trained from the get-go, that we look at problems from an individual standpoint. We look at who's in the room. We don't talk about people who's outside of the room because we feel the most power is related to what you specifically can do. We don't, yes, you can come in and talk about the relationship, but we can't change someone who's not in the room. We can't get them to agree. We can't get them to cooperate. We can't understand why they're not cooperating. So we always deal with people who's just in the room. And as a result, that's caused a problem. Here's the problem. We've not fully appreciated the damage and the disruption that narcissists and other toxic people do to people, to their partners, to their families. That your stress is being directly related to this relationship. It isn't because you're making bad decisions. It isn't because you aren't trying to be assertive. It's because you're literally being made to feel crazy because this person's using very cult-like tactics, programming, manipulation, exploitation to keep you off balance and confused. And for some reason, I'm sad to say, it breaks my heart, the field's been slow to see that. That's why you're struggling to find good therapists, is because they've not caught up. Actually, social media, what's happening here is on the leading edge. It's not back in the therapy's office, unfortunately, it's here. So how to find a good therapist. It is starting to become an issue. There is starting to be training happening. I know that because there was a summit last year. I think it was it was early. Yeah, it was just recently a big summit. There are some clinicians you can definitely follow that is very, very helpful. Chris, you always have to help me. I wish I could hear you say it, Chris, because I know I'm going to say it wrong. Dr. Ramani Durvasola. She'll put it in the text. She's an excellent one to follow. She is one of I would say one of the top experts in the field on it. Another good one to follow is Lindsay Gibson. Lindsay Gibson. She has books. She calls it emotionally immature, but she's really talking about toxic people. Thank you. That's how you spell Dr. Ramani. Her channel on YouTube is called Dr. Ramani. So if you want to follow Dr. Ramani's YouTube channel, that's where to find her. Lindsay Gibson, I don't believe, has a YouTube channel, but she's got 2 books out, and they specifically are more addressed towards families, growing up in a toxic family, but it doesn't mean you can't read it and apply it to your stuff. In fact, I have one of her books right here. It's called The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, Dr. Lindsay Gibson. There are other really fantastic people as well. The person who wrote Psychopath Free, I think it's Kinsey. I'm trying to remember his name. Also, Manjit Rupai has a really good book called Toxic Narcissist Relationships. It's a survival guide. But back to the question, how to find a good therapist. So there's some things that you can look for that are terminologies that therapists, Durva Sula. Thank you. I know it was, I know I was killing the name every time I said it, but thank you so much for that. But there are some things that you can look for that will help you know if you've got an informed therapist. That's what you're looking for, an informed therapist. Ask them point blank, what do you think of the topic of narcissistic abuse? Yeah, Codependency No More is really a good book, but here's the problem. I have an issue with codependency. So Jeff, would you put that in the questions for me? Because I want to address it. It's a big topic and it's a big kind of area here on TikTok, and I'll tell you why I'm not talking about it, so I can get into that. So if you wouldn't mind adding that, because I'd love to get into that. So ask if these therapists know a couple things. You want to know, are they trauma related? Are they trauma trained? Are they familiar with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk? There's another great name, but Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote the book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's probably the current leading book in trauma. So I would, and Sharon, make sure you put your questions in the comments so we don't miss them, okay? So ask how trauma informed is your clinician. Also ask what they know about betrayal trauma and their theory of codependency. And I'll get into why you want to know their theory of codependency. And then also ask them what they think about narcissistic abuse and what they know about it. And do they treat personality disorders? Do they see individuals and those who've been in a relationship with one? Those are that's great. Yep. By the way, I got to hear Dr. van der Kolk speak. He is as soft-spoken, as sweet of a guy as you can imagine him to be. He really is an amazing person. But those are the questions you want to ask, Lady Mar, when you're looking for a clinician. And sadly, it's really hard to find one. I do have a list of coaches who are trauma trained. So if you're interested in needing help and want some direction from me, please DM me over on Instagram under the same handle, Carrie McAvoy PhD, and I would be happy to give you a list of people that I personally know and are wonderful. Hey, you guys can hear these people speak, by the way. They speak regularly at a big conference that's annually held in Washington, D.C. It's put on by the Psychotherapy Networker. It's called Psychotherapy Networker Symposium. It's every March. Every March is religiously. Every March starts on usually a Wednesday or Thursday, goes through Sunday, and they bring in the leading experts. You want to hear John Gottman? You want to hear Bessel van der Kolk? How about Susan Johnson or Dr. Ramani was there this last year? Also, another one, big name, and Emily Nagoski, the one who wrote Come As You Are, or She Comes First. She Comes First. She was here this year. Brene Brown was at one of them. I got to hear her speak. So if you're ever interested, you don't have to be licensed to go to these. Anybody is allowed to go. So if that's something that's kind of like right down your alley and you want to hear these big names and go to these seminars, that's an awesome way to get, top research, meet these people, get to hear them in person. It's really, really cool. Okay. So that was a long answer. I hope that helps. I still have dreams about my past abuser. Yeah, that happens for a long time. That's part of PTSD. It's a very normal reaction to have it. Here's an interesting thing I want you to take away. You can't control dreams. It's an unconscious working out of trauma and issues and all sorts of stuff. But I would recommend you keep a dream journal. I know it sounds kind of like, why would I want to keep track of my disturbing dreams? They're upsetting. Why would I want them on paper? Well, there's some couple reasons why, and I'm going to tell you why. One is, I want to give you a real encouraging research study that I came across. I thought was fascinating. They were looking at nightmares among Vietnam vets, and they all had PTSD. And they were looking at the group that had nightmares versus a group that didn't have nightmares. Guess which group did better? The group that had the nightmares. Because the mind was actively working on it, trying to figure it out and make sense of it. I am a chronic sufferer of very bad dreams. I've had bad dreams. My dream life is not you don't want my dream life should be movies. Seriously. I dream sci-fi. I dream about monsters. I dream about a lot of really intense stuff. I've learned to be okay with it. I've learned to realize that just is a part of me. It's part of how I'm now getting embarrassed because I'm talking about myself. But I've just learned to embrace that part of myself. But here's why keeping a dream journal can be helpful. One is you're writing it down, and writing is more and more research coming on writing. There's a researcher in University of Texas at Austin who's been looking at writing, journaling, just writing your feelings, writing the stuff down, and finds that it is life-changing. Life-changing. People hear me talk about where I am with how I am doing after this terrible relationship I was in, which is extremely abusive. And actually, my life was at threat in this relationship. And when they hear I'm only 3 years out, they're like, really? You're just 3 years away from that relationship? I thought it was like years ago. Well, it was because I worked on it for 3 years. I wrote the story. I rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. And it healed me. The writing of it, seeing the truth, breaking through the deceptions healed me. So I strongly recommend writing for all of you. Just every day, write down how you're feeling. What are you feeling? How are you feeling? Why you're feeling? Keep it in a safe spot. Burn it. Tear it up. Doesn't matter. You don't need to keep it. Don't need to go back and ever look at it again. But they found the act of writing, just the act of writing is healing. Isn't that amazing? And it's so simple. So they actually did a study. The study was one group wrote like what they wore every day, and the other group wrote what they were feeling. And they had just lost their jobs. All of them had lost their jobs. The people who wrote what they're feeling found a job within 2 to 3 months, and the group that didn't. They weren't as slow or slower. Isn't that amazing? So please just write. So do that with your dream journals. And then here's another task with a dream journal. Because I was trained to work with play therapy and symbolism, so I actually love to interpret dreams. I find it a lot of fun. But it all has meaning. Every aspect in that dream is an aspect of you, actually, not of other people. It's you. So when you associate with those aspects, like if you're dreaming about your abuser, what does that person represent to you? Fear, hate, maybe confusion, maybe a blend of love and hate, maybe risk. I don't know, but free associate and write all the names down to what associates to you that person. What else is in the dream? Right? What was the conflict in the dream? Were you being threatened? Were you being chased? Were you missing? Are you being late? I mean, those are also those are examples of what's going on in your life right now. So those are the kind of dynamics that you're struggling with at the moment. Who else is in the dream? What else in the dream? Again, free associate. And if you do this night after night, you'll begin to see what your issues are, and then maybe you can address them in your real life. And then you'll stop dreaming it. Dreaming is actually just an effort to make sense of stuff. It's your mind's way of trying to heal you. That's all that it is. It's always working in your best interest. Your unconscious is always working in your best interest. So don't view them as scary or awful. Yeah, they can be very scary, but view them as your body's way of trying to heal you, because that's what it's doing. So cool. Is DBT useful for narcissistic personalities or high spectrum traits? So let's first talk about what DBT is. It's dialectic behavioral therapy. It was developed by Marsha Linehan, and it's very fascinating. It's usually, if they're done correctly, and you want to look for someone who's certified in doing DBT, and not just someone who just knows a little bit about and doing it. You want someone who really has been trained. It is an intensive program. Last I knew, it had a group therapy component and an individual component. They watch their medications really carefully. You're not allowed to be abusing drugs or alcohol when you're doing this. I mean, it's a pretty rigorous program. I had a client I know who did it, went through it. Well, not with me, I'm not certified, but I know someone who had seen a certified therapist and did this, and it changed her life. It changed her life. This person, I would say, had a little narcissistic traits, but a lot of borderline personality traits, and throw in a lot of dissociation on top of it. That's sort of the mix, the person I was seeing. Very, very severe, struggling a lot with a lot of heart issues. So Yes, it was amazing. It was life-changing. Could it help with narcissistic personality disorder? I think why not? I'm not for sure why it wouldn't. I'm sort of thinking it's really teaching you how to regulate your emotions. And honestly, narcissists suck at it. And the way they suck at it is so a borderline dysregulates. They're like, whoa, everything's just this chaotic mess. But what a narcissist does is they lock it down. They discharge it by being in denial or compartmentalizing. And then they end up associating it to everybody around you. They accuse you of what they're doing. You're being always dramatic. Why do you, that kind of thing. Don't mean to trigger any of you. But so it's teaching you how to deal with your emotions in a more healthy way. Of course, why is that? That would be a great thing, right? That would be very, very helpful. The challenge is going to be to get anyone to do that. Narcissists don't see themselves as the problem. They're externalizers. It's everybody else's problem, not their problem. So it would be the rare narcissist who says, yeah, please sign me up for that. And plus a year plus worth of work, to see what I'm saying? How many narcissists do you know can do that? They'll say they will, but then the follow through won't be there. Did I say I lived with one? Mm-hmm. Yes, I did. So yes, I would say sure, go for it. If you can get someone to agree to it, absolutely. Why not? I just don't think you're going to get them to agree to it. Is it possible to misdiagnose a child because of age? Wow, Heart of Texas, this is a tough question. First of all, are you talking about narcissistic personality disorder? Or are you talking about something else? Because if you're talking about personality disorder, we're not clinically, technically allowed to diagnose anyone before the age of 18. You are not an antisocial personality disorder. You are not a borderline. You're not a narcissist. You're not anything before the age of 18. Because the personality is still, the personality is under development until the mid-late 20s. It takes all that amount of time for you to gain all these sort of ego strengths and structures. And each developmental phase looks different and has different issues and dynamics, and at times does look very narcissistic. Maybe even looks quite borderline-ish too. Yes, there are those who show signs of antisocial personality disorder early. That would be called oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder. You might see it with a reactive attachment problem. That might be another way that it might show up early. But to call anybody a narcissist or borderline or any of the personality disorders is actually flagrant abuse. It's wrong. They cannot. It's unethical because it's a breach of the DSM. And, if you read, it says clearly after the age of 18. So, but can you see traits of these things coming on? Sure, but I want to make sure that wouldn't be related to developmental stage. How many teenagers do you know aren't self-preoccupied? And there's no future planning yet because that's still coming online, hasn't fully appeared yet. They're not great. They have some abstract thinking, but there's a whole long ways to go on that one. And they don't always show good judgment, and they're not always in great impulse control. See what I'm saying? Sounds awfully narcissistic, right? But that's just being a teenager. And we all, we've all been there and we've worked through it. So that's why I'm very slow to say any of this about anyone who's under 18. It makes me very uncomfortable. And by the way, I'm first a child psychologist. That's what actually my training was in child psychiatry or psychology, not psychiatry, psychology. But then when I started doing, and all my work experience, undergraduate training all the way to when I became licensed was working with kids and teens. But then I didn't have a passion for it that I thought I would have. So as a result, I shifted into the adult population. And thank goodness psychology is that flexible, allowed me to do that. So I know a lot about kids. And I would say, is it possible to misdiagnose them? Oh, absolutely. It's possible to misdiagnose everyone around everything. I don't know if you guys know that, but the inter-rater reliability on diagnoses is not really great. Have you ever noticed, if you guys have been involved with someone who's got a pretty complex mental health history, that somebody says they're bipolar and somebody else says they're borderline, and then somebody else says they've got, oh no, it's SADS, it's depression. Oh no, it's a mix of anxiety with ADHD thrown in. Have you ever noticed that? That's because we all have a different way of seeing problems, and there's no blood test to know. So we apply our theoretical understanding, and that's how we come up with these, So I know it's not good. I'm not thrilled about that part of the field, frankly. And it's a lot of trial and error. And one of the videos I'm going to be talking about, upcoming videos on differential diagnosis. Some of these look really similar. Like I was just listening to a fellow content creator, Elliot C. Smith. He's a self-professed borderline personality disorder who also, I think, struggles with bipolar disorder. So he talks about this. So I'm not saying anything that's secret on him. But he just put a video out this week, I believe, that said that he was trying a stimulant for ADHD. And he said it's really helping him. It's helping him across the board. He said some of the symptoms he thought he had related to these other conditions are disappearing. And that happens. I've seen that happen. I had somebody come in one time years ago who's really struggling with something. And I thought I had all my theories of what was going on with her. And I sent her to a psychiatrist who then started her on antidepressant. And she came back and said, I don't need you. I'm doing so great. I don't, so I've seen that. I've seen like when they finally isn't it the case with us medically? How many times you get a symptom like your GI and you chase this and you chase this, maybe it's lactose intolerant, maybe it's celiac or, and then you finally stumble into what it is and then you understand it better. Okay, so great question. Thank you for that. And make sure you guys are putting your questions in the Q&A so that I don't miss them. Any thoughts about narcissists needing reparenting? I think it's, I don't know a lot of what reparenting means. I mean, as I can tell you from my take on it, like working on the inner child and doing some meditative work. I think, is that what you're asking about? Silly goose. I like that, silly goose. I'm not for sure if that's exactly what you're asking about, but yeah, would it be beneficial? Absolutely, it would be beneficial. There's a lot of things that are good, and they're good for everybody. I don't know why it wouldn't be good for a narcissist. Again, the issue is going to be getting them into the office, and that's going to be really the hard part. Can I say more about codependent no more? Jeff, thank you so much for bringing this up. So let me tell you why first of all, I just don't like labels. I'll just go tell you that right now. I just don't like them. They're reductionist. That's why I don't like them, because we're more than a label. You are way more than your abuse, and you're way more than your recovery. You are a super complex person with lots of stuff going on in you, and that makes you a fascinating person. So we're not just one thing. And even when you start to look at reasons of why we do something, there are a million reasons why we do something. There's good reasons and bad reasons and confused reasons and, healthy reasons and unhealthy reasons. There's all sorts of stuff. So when you're working with a client in therapy, you start to see all of this. And there's multiple threads of reasons why people do what they do when they do it. And it's just not one thing. So that's my first struggle with codependency, is that I feel like it's used to explain way too much and it doesn't explain it. The other problem I have with it is it came out of the addiction model, not trauma model. It has to do with addictions. It's what happens in families when somebody has an uncontrolled addiction. The family starts to then change as a way to control the dynamics. They reduce this person's access. They try to control money. They try to control safety. They try to minimize risk. They do all this stuff in order to keep themselves safe and keep this person safe. And in this process, they get sick doing this. So it's out of the great reasons. It makes sense. If you have somebody who's hitting something every night after work, you would stop buying it, right? But by stop buying it, you're now taking responsibility for their behavior. And that gets you into the cycle of, then you're doing all this management when really the person who's ill, who has the addiction, needs to do their own management or not do their management. And the other problem is boundaries get to be really funny. We don't set good boundaries. There tends to be way too much intrusiveness and all of this. That's codependency. It came out of the addiction model. It's not related to trauma. The problem I have with it when it's applied to trauma is it assigns responsibility to the family members for the breaches and intrusions and control. They're saying, you're bad, you're sick for doing these things. And if you want to get healthy, you need to see how you've participated with the addiction and to stop. So that then says everybody who's ever gotten into a toxic relationship, you should have known that person was toxic. You should have seen all the damage in their life. You should have known they were fooling you when you got into the relationship. Now you take responsibility for that so that you become a better person. What? Now that I've gone through it, I had no clue. Did you have any clue? How is that your fault that you were being deceived and exploited, right? And if you really look at the people who are researching trauma, who are researching abuse, particularly domestic abuse, which is why I love Don Hennessy. I always talk about him. He has a book that we don't talk enough about. It's called How He Gets Into Her Head. He said that. He said, hey, we've been looking at the wrong direction. We've been looking at the victims, the partners, and we should be looking at the abusers. They're the one that set this up. They're the one. And by the way, when we look at the victim, we're participating with the abusers. That's what they want us to do. They don't want us looking at them. They want us looking at the partners. So we're colluding with the abusers when we do this. Isn't that horrifying? That up to now, too many in the field are participating with abusive people because we keep focusing on partners. What's wrong with partners for picking bad people? Well, bad people fooled us. They've tricked all of us, and they're tricking us now by focusing on the partners. So that's why I won't agree with it. Codependency is a wrong label. It assigns way too much responsibilities to partners that have no idea they're being exploited and abused. It's not codependency. You are not codependent. Now, did you come out of a codependent family and then end up, as a result, vulnerable, and then you got into an abusive relationship? Yeah, that's possible. That can happen. I've seen that happen. Sure. They actually did a breakdown of looking at all the partners who've ever gotten abusive relationships. And you want to see that. Look at Sandra Brown's work out of University of Purdue. She's amazing. She's got the latest stuff on it. She did this big study of pathological love relationships. It's fascinating. And also there are other people. Dr. Ramani's talking about this too. They find that the people who end up in abusive relationships or narcissistic abusive relationships, some are codependent. Some have come out of broken, dysfunctional, families with addiction. But some are just good people, easygoing people. And because they're easygoing, they got exploited, which is really awful. And then there are some people who actually had personality disorders and are troubled. And so there's this toxic combination, the famous toxic combination that meet up is a borderline personality disorder ends up with a narcissistic personality disorder. But that's not everybody. So there's these segments of these groups of people. It's not one group of people. So there's my long ass answer with my soapbox issue on codependency and why you don't hear me talking about it here. I won't talk about it because to me, it's a misunderstanding of it. I appreciate asking it though. And I know there are other clinicians or content creators who talk about it as, people pleasing and stuff. And yeah, it has a place. I'm glad we do that. But I just think to put it with trauma, it's just a misunderstanding. So, I'm the biggest overthinker. Is there a reason? I have a feeling, Claire, I don't know if you're comfortable with me. I know I don't know you very well, but I don't know how comfortable you with me doing this, but I can tell you some reasons why I think all of us sometimes overshare, or I start overthink. Also, I know oversharing is on the list, so I just saw that too. But I have a feeling that people who tend to there are people who just are overthinkers. That's the way you're very analytical. And part of it can be anxiety related, that you don't want to be stupid or you're very self-conscious. And so you like break down the process and you're very like maintaining your image and making sure, because you just see, here's the thing is that you haven't felt safe to be you. And so you're doing a lot of risk management by overthinking. It's because you anticipate something's going to go wrong or it's going to look wrong. So you jump ahead trying to protect yourself. That's why I do it. It's because it's a way to avoid danger. It's my thought. But I just know that there are people who are more prone to anxiety, or perfectionism tends to do a lot of overthinking. But it's, like I said, it's part of anxiety. It's part of the kind of dynamic of anxiety. And anxiety, when you break anxiety down, it's always a management of risk and control. It's you control to manage risk. So if you think about what's a phobia? Well, I'm afraid of whatever. So I'm going to tell on myself. I had a phobia for years. You guys please don't laugh. Please don't laugh. Ready? Overflowing toilets. I had nightmares about it. Nightmares. I'd be in a girls' locker room and they're all overflowing and there's water on the floor. Yeah, isn't that awful? My kids cured me of it. I have 3 boys. I have 3 boys, and guess what they did a lot? They can't touch themselves, so they use lots of toilet paper, and so they plug the toilet all the time. So I was always unplugging the toilet. And sure enough, even though with the new ones, one of them one time went over. It actually, because the old fashioned ones, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, they would overflow. They would run and run. You had to like pull the top off and get it to stop, or it was just like, it would be a mess. It'd be a horrible mess. I found out from my mom where it came from. I was 2, and it happened at the house when I was little, really little. And here it was happening. Now, she doesn't remember my reaction, but she remembers that I was there and it was occurring. And I'm sure it was very scary to see that water pour over and, start flooding the floor. And then, of course, it's gross and, all of this stuff. I'm sure it was. And I'm sure nobody paid attention that I was freaked out and they didn't help me with it, and it became a phobia. Now, am I saying that's how phobias develop? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, what was it? It was an attempt for me to manage fear. It was an attempt to manage risk, for me to feel safer. So I just avoided it. What I discovered by facing it was there was no threat. So what? So I get my feet wet. So it's a little dirty and I have to go wash my feet. Oh, well, it's not like you can't solve it. So that's what anxiety is really. It's an attempt to sort of keep us safe. But great question. I appreciate that. Okay. So some lady, it feels like gaslighting, narcissistic therapy, what you said. I'm not following you, Lamar. Are you here? If you're still here, could you say more what you're trying? I will watch for your name and pop it back up next, because you're trying to talk about a therapy that feels like gaslighting and doesn't feel like it's helpful. And I want to make sure that's serious. I want to make sure I understand that. So please say more. Oops, I've jumped forward. I'm sorry, I missed somebody. How do you work on oversharing? There are groups of people who overshare. Neurodivergent people tend to overshare. Autistic people, ADHD people. There's a when you miss social cues, you don't always know how to manage them very well. I'm autistic, by the way. So yeah, I'm a chronic oversharer. Absolutely. So, I'm not for sure. Lady Mar is accusing me. I'm just saying she's talking about a therapy, and I want to make sure I understand the therapy. So there's nothing personal to me about it. I'm fine, you guys. I do really want to understand what she's talking about, because I think it's very, very important. So I hope she says more. Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad, Claire, that was spot on. But yeah, so oversharing is really common. But one of the things that happens with oversharing is when you've been traumatized, you also overshare, because that's part of the trauma. If you had a near miss on the highway and someone almost kills you, you're going to talk about it for days, right? Like, you won't believe what happened. And then this happened, and then it cut me off, and then the police, you're going to talk about it. That's common. And the reason we do that is part of trauma recovery. In fact, not to do it causes problems. It actually stunts the recovery process. You need to go through that, because every time you retell, you actually are reprocessing the memory and changing it in new ways, so that you're having a better perspective. You're hearing yourself say it. You're getting someone else's feedback about all of it. It's part of the healing. That's why I struggle with us when we say it's trauma dumping. No, it's not trauma dumping. It's trauma recovery. It's probably trauma. So yes, it's a very common process with trauma and healing. So the problem is, here's the bigger problem. Most people are not trauma informed. Most people are overwhelmed. They first of all can't quite believe something this bad could happen to somebody. So you're going to experience their invalidation and a dismissal of you, which is the last thing you need and the worst thing that you need for this. So that's why I love this community, is because it's a safe place for you to come and dump and talk and process, and for us to have a chance to sit with you around it. That's why I think coaches of narcissistic abuse have such a critical role to play, because it's a really great space for you to work through it and say it. But be careful who you're oversharing to. Really, really be careful, because there's a lot of people who are just not up to it. They're not psychologically up to doing the work of knowing how to really be safe and be there for you. But oversharing is common after trauma. It's just part of what happens with traumatic recovery. How and when do you realize you are with a narcissist? That's an interesting question, Trentus. And by the way, I don't go live with anybody who asks unless we pre-plan it. So anybody who asks me, someone just was asking me to go live with me. If you want to go live with me, I have no problem. I would love that. But my autism, I don't like spontaneous things popped up on me. So I need to mentally plan and go into the space. So if you want to do that with me, please just privately message me and we'll plan to do that, okay? So how did I realize it was a narcissist? It was a slow process for me. When, this is a thing about being a psychologist. First of all, I have a couple things. People think I'm superhuman. I'm not superhuman. Psychologists are not superhuman. Yes, we do know how to diagnose. Yes, we do understand personality dynamics. Yes, we know a lot about how relationships work, but it doesn't mean we're masterful at it when it comes to ourselves. We're human, We're blind to our own blind spots. I knew he interrupted a lot. And he didn't think he interrupted. He thought he was sharing the floor with me. He told me so, and he wasn't. I have a feeling if you actually taped us and then divided it by time, you would find out it was probably 66 to 33%. He's probably hogging the floor 2/3 of the time to my 1/3. But he listened. One of the things that I noticed, he was very meticulous about his appearance. I mean, like meticulous, and raised up with 3 boys. Yeah, they are and they aren't, but he was like kind of more, but so what? So some men are, right? I mean, that's not a big problem. I caught him lying I didn't know he was lying until, actually, I didn't know he was lying until 2 months into the marriage. And when he got caught, he was cheating. I didn't know that. So I didn't know he was cheating. I didn't know he'd cheated on other people in his life. I didn't know that either. I did know he thought highly of himself. He thought very highly, but good self-esteem does, right? So that part was really kind of hard to distinguish. So the person I met didn't have big flagrant signs. He really didn't. Except that here's one thing that I ignored. There was not a lot of reciprocity, meaning like if I was upset or having a bad day, there wasn't a lot of space for me to do that. And he would even be a little dismissive of it or really dismissive of it. And he didn't want me challenging his schedule or the way he did things. It had to be a certain way. And I didn't realize that he wouldn't allow that from me. I didn't see that lack of mutuality. I didn't notice that. But it wasn't, I mean, when you guys read my story, because I do outline exactly how it unfolds. And yeah, I don't include everything, but I include the highlights. I know people now coming back and myself going, oh, that's a red flag. Oh, I didn't see it. It was subtle. When you're in the moment, you let a lot of stuff go because you feel they're nervous or, it's not that big of a deal or you don't realize what game changers these things are. You didn't just really. So I have to say this is a long ass answer again. So I always do that. But it wasn't until I found out he was cheating, and that was 2 months after we'd gotten married. And we were on our second honeymoon, and I got a letter from another woman who said, oh, I guess the joke's not just on me, it's on you too. We've been dating for 3 months. And he's the first person I've had sex with since I divorced my husband. And I remember thinking, I think she sent this to the wrong person. That was my first reaction. I even went back and it's like, is this my name? How did she, and then I started thinking about all the time, like, she's saying they meet up for weekends. Where did he fit that in? He was working. I mean, I never thought that he'd be lying about work, that his hours weren't his hours. Or I had no clue that someone could run a deception that big, that deep, that put that much effort into being deceptive. Here's somebody was yesterday or day before, Matt Pfeiffer put out am I the ass kind of a example. He pulled it from Reddit of a woman who says, hey, I'm with my boyfriend 24/7. Now that we're together, he says he doesn't want me around all that much. Am I an ass for still wanting to be with him? See, my guy wanted me to be with him 24/7. He said it kept him safe. Now I'm finding out it was his way of deceiving me into thinking that he was being a good boy when he wasn't being a good boy, that he was using it as a cover. That's how great mine was. He was very deceptive, very exploitive. I don't think, looking back, and now I know he's a narcissistic sociopath. I know one of the top experts in sex addiction in the United States. She read the book. She actually wrote an endorsement. I should advertise her endorsement. It's an amazing endorsement. She also presents on sexual addiction. She said she works, so she sees a lot of it. And she said he's actually not a sex addict, Carrie. He's calculating. He's a conniving, calculating person. He's a sociopath. Yeah, I know. I figured that out. So, yeah, that long answer, it took me a long time. 13 months, 14 months, and I'm a clinician, and I know how to see it. And I didn't see it. He hit it that well. So, yes, I can believe that somebody could be... in a relationship for years and not know. Have you guys heard, did you know that, I can't think of her name. Anne, she's a blonde. She wrote a book called, her sister did, her sister wrote a book called Anonymous about her father, and how it wasn't until after her father died that they found out he had a secret double life he'd been living in New York City. And they didn't know. It didn't come to light until after. She's a woman who's kind of gone out as sort of, she hooked up for a while with Ellen DeGeneres. You know, guys know who I'm talking about? She's not the current one with Ellen, but she once with Ellen. Anne Heche. I think that's her. Yeah, you guys know who I'm talking about? Really cute, blonde, pixie looking woman. She's, openly bi. She wrote a book about it called Anonymous or Anonymity or something. Yes, Anne Heche. Thank you. If you guys look for her name, you'll see she has a story of her father. And he was like a big name and big identity. And he had a completely secret life that his family had no clue about. None at all. I think he died of AIDS. Yeah, that's why it was such a big deal, was because they didn't know, what that he had been running with in going to these kind of like these, anyway, you get the point. But yeah, so yes, it is possible to go a long time and not know that you have a partner who has a secret second life and who's doing a lot of this exploitation. Will a covert narcissist ever apologize for their actions? No. Dr. Romney, Dr. Romney is proposing that we have completely misunderstanding covert versus overt narcissism. That she's saying that every type of narcissist subtype, like the somatic one, the vulnerable, the hero, the grandiose one, every type has an overt manifestation and a covert manifestation. But I need to understand it more. I feel like I don't quite get what she's trying to say, and to be able to explain it super well. But the bottom line about all of them is that unless they have this massive epiphany and realize they're destroying their life, and I think that's what's happened with Ben of Raw Motivations and Mental Healness Lee, is they have this big sort of like, and I know of one other man, I'm very aware of another self-aware narcissist. He runs Core Recovery. It's a sex addiction program. And he says he's a self-aware narcissist. And if you ever listen to his interviews, and I don't know his name, but I love this guy. He will tell you he is never not going to be a narcissist. He says he never is not going to be. He said every decision, he literally was challenged to think about every frickin' decision he made and why he was making it. And he realized all of it was terribly self-motivated, even down to what shirt he wore. He had a mentor and a AA member. He went through AA because there wasn't a lot of essay stuff available at that time. So he had a sponsor who made him go for a year, every day for a year, and everything, like even why he got a haircut and what kind of haircut, he had somebody scrutinize and challenge him on. This guy comes across so humble, so broken. But he says he'll never not be a narcissist. But yeah, how often does that occur? It doesn't occur often, unfortunately. You don't see a lot of self-aware narcissists. Now, interestingly enough, my ex knows he's a narcissist. He laughs about it. He thinks it's funny. But is he care? No. He buys into it. He thinks he is that special. Exactly. So for him, it's like, it's a badge of honor. And a lot of other narcissists I've met too feel that way too. They don't feel bad about it. They sort of see it as sort of, part of who they are. Hey, so good to see you, my other moderators here now. So how do we help narcissistic victims that don't see it? Ooh, great question, Mama JT. I like that question. Make sure you guys put your questions in the Q&A so I don't miss them. How do we help them? I guess the best way to help them, and I have known a few in my life, is for you just to support them. And then when they tell you a story that you can hear the gaslighting or dismissive or invalidating, yeah, exactly. Baton you trying. Well, that's a really big. Yeah, you could just sort of like by saying, "Oh wow, that must hurt. How are you doing with that?" I wouldn't say, oh, that sounds like gaslighting. Don't put them in a position of feeling like they have to choose. They won't choose. They're going to choose not you. It's what's going to happen. It's because if you push them, yeah, I know I tried to say it, didn't I? If you push them, they will choose, and they'll choose not to have a relationship with you. So don't corner them. You don't want to they're already being cornered everywhere in their life. Betanya be trying. Oh, that's cute. Thank you. So they're already trying really, really hard everywhere in their life, and it's not going really well. They need support. They need to know that a safe place for them to come and show up and share what's really going on. And that's what you can provide. And by you doing that, you show them that there is another way. You just being different really helps them to know there's hope. And I have a family member who's been a terribly abusive relationship. And this family member says to me, just the fact that you're saying to me, this is hard to believe. I don't really believe this exists, and except that I have it with you. And that gives me hope that maybe you're telling the truth. See, isn't that powerful? And that's what you can be doing for these people in your life, is you can be showing them that there are other types of relationships. There are healthy relationships by you being the example and creating the space. But don't push them to make the decision. They have to come to it on their own. And it will take as long as it takes. And you know that it takes a really long time. It takes longer than most of us feel we really have it in us to deal with trying to love these people. But it does take as long as it takes. Oh, I'm so sorry to read that. Man. She's doing what I did. You know what? You might want to give her my book. Get a hold of me and I'll give you a free ebook for it, okay? You can give her a free ebook and tell her, hey, I know someone this happened to. She was widowed too, and I just get so worried for you, and I love you, and I don't want this happening to you. That's what I would say, something like that. And contact me, Mama JT, over on my Instagram account, okay? I'm sorry. That's awful. Okay, so Stockholm syndrome type of issues with yes, Acid Fairy 5. I hope you're still here. Absolutely, absolutely. What they're finding out is that the same type of cult programming that's used to solicit new followers is what's being used against narcissistic abuse victims. That they do excessive eye gazing. They've actually done research. It's called Love You More. My book is called Love You More. Always thank you guys. It's Love You More, the harrowing tales of sex addiction, double cross, and sex addiction and double cross. I have a link in my bio if you want a discount on it. You can buy it directly from me from an ebook as well as the audiobook, but but it's also sold wherever you guys buy books, like online, Amazon, Kobo, everything. Oh, it had you crying. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Cognitive fog is really, please contact me. Please contact me. But, so back to the question. I want to remember the question, guys. I spaced off. And thank you for asking. Oh, Stockholm syndrome. Okay. So Stockholm syndrome is, essentially what happened was it's Patty Hearst wasn't the first person. It was already coined before Patty Hearst, but Patty Hearst was probably the first big public person. And for those of you who are born later than me, she was a rich granddaughter, I believe, of William Randolph Hearst. Wealthy family, big newspaper mogul in the California area. They actually have his home is now a monument, a museum, beautiful. You ever had a chance to see it, please see it. It's really worthwhile the tour. But she got kidnapped. I think she's 19 years old, got kidnapped. And a few months later after she got kidnapped, she ended up joining this terrorist group and actually robbing, holding up banks and stuff. I think it was bank robbery she got into. She ended up being charged for it and was sent to jail for 35 years. And then she was let out when they really kind of had some sympathy on her. And that's when they started hearing a lot about Stockholm syndrome. How could somebody life be kidnapped, life threatened, then turn around and be part of this terrorist group? Why would she turn and support them? That was the first time kind of the public got to watch what happened and realize there's something kind of really weird that happens. How hostages sometimes fall in love with their hostage takers. How do they do that? Why do they do that? Well, that's essentially, by the way, what's happened to every single one of us. If you've been in a narcissistic abusive relationship, you've fallen in love with your abuser. This person's made you dependent on them. And the way that they've made you dependent is they've created this incredible combination of experiences that has led you to feel confused, thrown off, They also threatened. They use with the intermittent rate of withdrawal and love. They give love and then pull it away, give love and pull away. They use this subtle manipulation in gaslighting, keep you confused so you don't know what's reality. And because you're getting increasingly feeling worse, you start to depend on them to help you out with decisions, because it's very strange. It's hard to describe unless you've experienced it. As an outsider of a clinician, I really wouldn't have believed it until I went through it. There's a scene in my book that I share near the end where I find out he's still cheating. I caught him again. I'm devastated. He said that he was in recovery. I now know he's not in recovery. And we go and see a therapist after we just find out. And the therapist tries to confront him. He shuts her down. He essentially silences her and makes her ineffective. And there's this moment where she looks at him and she gets him to sort of like rephrase what I'm feeling. And I break down and I start to cry. And he pulls me into his chest and lets me cry in his shoulder. And I'm thinking as I'm doing this, you're the person that hurt me. And now you're the person who's comforting me. I've been here before. This is all show. It doesn't mean anything. I don't even know who I am and how I'm here and what I'm doing. I just knew I was so confused. It's very hard to explain that. But yeah, you've been technically brainwashed. And that's back to Mama JT, why it's so hard for your friend to see this. She's in the love bombing, the idealism phase. She doesn't realize this person isn't a real person. He's already confusing her, or she, or whoever she's in a relationship with, it's confusing her. And as a result, she doesn't know what up and what's down, but all she knows is she feels this intensity. It's not even like love. You think it's love, but it's intensity. And you've mistaken intensity for love, and it's not love. Because you know what? As I stood back and really looked at the relationship, I'm not for sure the guy he probably at times maybe slightly respected me for some things. No, he didn't love me. I don't know. He was never in love with me. I think at times he often hated me, It was really weird. I know he respected my mind, but I know he didn't respect me for my behavior, for being in a relationship with him. I thought he thought I was a fool. But, strange. It's very strange. So yes, it's cult programming. They use excessive eye gazing. They use excessive attention. They mimic you. They do intermittent rate of reward so that you're bonded, or they use real forms of gaslighting and manipulation that causes exploitation. They also do a lot of deception. Yeah, it's awful. And you're right. There is decision fatigue, and it is real, and it is exhausting. So how do you wreck gaslighting? Gaslighting is, you guys all know where the terminology came from, right? From the 1930s and 40s movies. It's a terminology came out of the movie. And the story of the movie is, because it's important, because this is actually what gaslighting is. So gaslighting, the purpose of the story was a guy meets a woman. He knows she's an heiress. She has a home, and he's hid jewelry in her home, and he wants access to it. So he marries her, and then he proceeds to make her think she's going crazy. So she'll be hospitalized in a sane asylum, so he has in full reign of the house to go find where he's hid the jewelry. That's the story. So he then begins to flicker the gas lights and plays music in the house. He has it all like piped in and all this stuff. This is back in the day before electronics. She thinks there's this weird musical, like supernatural music playing. She thinks the gas lights are flickering, and he denies it. He says it's all in her head. And then she gets more and more hysterical as he continues to play all these games and leaves her confused. And then she thankfully meets a cop who has a good clue about this and sets the guy up and catches him. So that's how it works. So gaslighting is an attempt to distract someone from the point of the discussion, in order to, and then by making the person feel invalidated, crazy, or wrong for thinking or feeling or saying whatever they say. So a good example is, I have a video about this. You call somebody out, let's say tonight I'm going to have Chinese, and I'm going to have stir fry, and I hate peas. That's true, by the way, I hate peas. And and what happens is I say, I don't want peas. And they say, instead of saying, okay, I'll tell them not to have peas on it, they say, well, what's wrong with you? Peas are really great. I don't know why you don't like peas. That's a very mild form of gaslighting. It makes me feel like there's something wrong with me for not liking peas. But they do it as a way to deceive you, but it also is partly out of fragility, because their ego is really fragile and they're insecure. So when you say something, they take it as like a threat, like it's personal, like you don't like peas. Well, I like peas, so there must be something wrong with me. I like peas and you don't. So they do something weird with it and they flip it around like, what's wrong with you? You know, and it isn't an issue. It's a non-issue. It's not really about them or you, but it's personalized, and then they attack you for it. And they attack you by making you bad. It's strange. So not all gaslighting is manipulative on purpose, but it is ultimately manipulating, because what happens is in the future, you'll just say, nah, I'm not in the mood for Chinese, right? You just ask for it less. You'll just do some other method to avoid the confrontation. My mom has done it to me my whole life. I grew up with it. I didn't know it. I didn't know there was a name for it until just recently, but she would do things like she would hurt my feelings and I'd bring it up to her and she'd go, I forget how sensitive you are. I'm like, no, I'm not being sensitive. You were rude. And that was hurtful. Please don't do that. But see, at the time when you're a kid and you hear that, you're like, oh, yeah, okay. And then you just say less. You be less. You know that you're being gaslit or abused, emotionally abused. If you feel like you have to hide more of yourself, you can't be freely yourself. You say less. You bring up less. You try not to talk about conflictual stuff. Yeah, exactly. I know, exactly. I'm reading some of you guys' comments. Exactly. It's weird. Yeah, I never did that. Oh yeah, they'll actually do that. They'll actually say that you're wrong. You made it up. Mine did that. He did it overtly. At the time, I didn't fall for it. It was really stupid. He actually said, I don't write about this, so this story is not in the book. His mom had a friend come in town, wanted to meet up with us. We made a plan for the two of them to have a day together. And then he said to me, you and I go out and have breakfast together. I thought, oh, cool. That'd be awesome. So we get to the hotel to drop his mom off and he says to me, get out. Why? We're going to go for breakfast. No, get out. Okay. So I get out. Next thing I know, we go down and we have breakfast with his mom and his friend. He said we weren't going to do this. And then we have to sit with him and make polite for another hour or two. And then I get back in the car and we're heading home. And I said, I thought you said we're going to go out. And he said, where'd you get that from? I never said that. Yeah, he did. But see, they'll do stuff like that. You know what? And you know what? You can't call them out on it. They'll deny forever. You'll never get them to admit. But that's part of what's happening is they want you literally to, oh, thank you so much. They literally want you to go crazy, in a way. They want you to by you doing that, they gain control. They have power over you. They get to define your reality. And then ultimately you start to depend on them. That's the frightening thing. You depend on, so what happens with my mom when my mom kept saying, you're sensitive. Then I would start to run things past her. And then as if my lived experience needed approval. No, it doesn't. Now she's shaping my interior world. Here's something I just heard someone say that is fascinating. This is Lindsay Gibson. I'm in a seminar right now with training with her online. And she said this. She said that every toxic parents, their children's interior world, they're hostile to their children's interior world because it's a direct threat. Did you get what I just said? And I think that's true for every single one of us here too. That, oh, I'm so sorry to lose you too. Thank you for hanging out with me today. That anybody you're in a toxic relationship with, your interior world, you having your feelings and your perceptions and your sense of life is a direct threat to them, and they're hostile to it. That's that funny love-hate thing that you're feeling. That makes you not for sure which is up and what's down. Let me say it one more time. Your emotional interior world, who you are, your dreams, wish, goals, your feelings, all of that, they're hostile to that. It's a direct threat to them because it usurps their control and power. So they're going to do whatever they can to control it in order to stay in control, which is how they're managing their risk, their fears, is to be in control of you. And the way to be in control of you is to not be okay with you're not allowed your interior world, your experiences, your thoughts, your feelings, all of this. Isn't that wow? And you feel it. You do feel it, don't you? You feel this funny love-hate thing going on, where they respect you and don't respect you, and they butter up, but they can't stand you, and They run you down and tear you apart and then turn around and want to make love to you. It's a mind fuck. It is that is the ultimate cognitive dissonance, is that you don't even know how I know my mom says she deeply loves me. My mom can't stand me. I know that. Everything she does says she can't stand me. My ex said that I had never been loved the way he loved me, but everything he did said to me I was not only not loved, but I was in his way, that I was a force in his way. I was a competition that was keeping him from the life that he wanted. Right? Isn't that how you're all feeling when you're in these relationships? Wow. I do plan to do some videos on it because to me, I'm still trying to get my head around how to say it in a soundbite. That's the hard part of TikTok. You got to say it in like 20 plus second soundbite in the best way possible that makes sense. It's very hard to do that. So that's why I love these lives, is because we can break it down and slow it down and really talk about it. But yeah, I have chills too. When I heard her say it, I was like literally like I wanted to replay. Like what? I know I've heard her say it before. Like what? I literally had to like, wow. I mean, wow. And here's the sad part, and I'm going to have to end. I know I did not get through all your questions. I'll read them through quickly and make sure I don't miss anybody's really big questions, is that a safe relationship embraces us. They celebrate us. They think everything about you is cool and awesome, and they find you delightful. Do you guys know that? That's what an ideal, healthy, if you have a friend who makes you feel that way, or one of your kids, or maybe somebody who loves you, that's what real love is. We are more able to be ourselves because of that. Anybody who makes you feel small or less, they're toxic and they're very dangerous, and we should not have contact with them. Thank you so much. You guys have a great weekend. Bye-bye.